Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to episode 318 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. This is our last show of 2022. And of course, it's a what's going on episode, or maybe it should be a what went on, don't you think, Maya?
Yeah, we were just saying we don't know what's happened to this year. So yes, it's a good time to look back and ask ourselves what did actually happen.
Yeah, what happened? And we can also, I think, take the luxury of thinking what will happen. That's always fun. We can do that at the end. So listeners, welcome to the show. If it's the first time you're listening to us, well, that's great. There's never, every episode is the best episode to start listening to us. And of course, you have 317 episodes to look back on. And my name is Pilar. I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant. And with me is Maya Middlemis, co-host once a month for what's going on. We're going to go straight into it. It will probably be a long show, just because there's a lot of stuff to reflect on, but we don't have a lot of different topics. We've got mainly two topics. We're going to look at what's happening in the world of remote workish kind of stuff in organizations. And then we'll look at freelancing because I think, Maya, something that it was already happening, but when remote work starting to be something that more and more people did, it was very big amongst the freelancers. And now it's really caught up with organizations, but they're very different worlds.
Definitely. It's sort of two parallel evolutions, and maybe we'll see them converging more in the future. I'm not sure, but it's really interesting to look at where it's at right now.
So if we start with remote working organizations, I picked this article which has a very negative tone to it, but it doesn't, well, actually it's got a very realistic tone to it. And I thought maybe it can guide us through our conversation. But of course, we've been observing stuff, we've been reflecting on stuff. And the title of this article, which came out on the 26th of October, 2022 in People Management, which is the magazine of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development in the UK. The title of this article is it time to revisit unproductive, flexible working arrangements? And very interestingly, if you look at the subtitle, it says, Russell Brown identifies the common problems with agile working policies and explains how to review them. We're still mixing everything.
Yes, so they're the same thing, are they?
I think agile with a small a for this one, but I think that is actually, well, at least we're now calling everything hybrid, so we can't mix.
I guess,
yeah.
Well, we're calling it, we're conflating flexible and agile and hybrid and remote and every other thing.
So maybe that won't change. So this article is interesting because it does highlight lots of common problems. And it says, well, although flexible stroke agile working has proven to be successful in many cases, many employees are experiencing problems which include, I found that really interesting, employees stretching the number of days they work from home beyond what was originally agreed. I hadn't heard that.
No, I guess that's an interesting one. I suppose maybe it's more in places that there's less flexibility if you're told you've got to work from home Thursday and Friday or something, but then you have your dentist appointment on a Tuesday. Do you add that or do you swap? And then maybe people are using it to actually demand that flexibility becomes more elastic as they relax into it and see what works.
Yeah, that's true. I
don't know.
That one took me by surprise because I would think that if we agree something, we stick to it. But hey, as you say, this is an evolution. And this one I've heard before, offices being empty on Mondays and Fridays.
Yeah, well, they're already empty Saturday, Sunday. This is not a bad thing. Let's extend this trend.
It is interesting because I have heard in some organizations this actually being an issue. And I think at the beginning it was a logistics issue because saying, well, we've suddenly got to fit everyone in So offices are now, we've got this surplus space 2 days a week, Mondays and Fridays, and then we don't have any space on the 3 days in the middle. So I think from a logistics point of view, but if it's something that's happening broadly, then I suppose we can live with it. It's
Well, we can figure out new ways of living with it. What can we do with that space on those days? If we're no longer having to distribute people through the week because we've given up any pretense of distancing and so on, then we might, if those spaces are going to be empty, maybe there can be events or more co-working kind of arrangements happening on those days. I'm sure there's something creative that can be done with an empty office.
Yeah. And then then there's a lack of atmosphere in inverted commas due to the office always being below capacity. I mean, those are things we were expecting this, we were seeing this. I find these 2 points very interesting. Difficulties with collaborative working and the supervision of junior employees who benefit from working closely with more experienced colleagues. We've been hearing about this. Yeah, this is a common issue. And then it says senior employees working from home and setting the wrong example.
Oh, God.
I hope it's the example of that they said they do one thing, then do another and don't tell anyone, because otherwise I can't see the wrong example. But
no, the assumptions implicit in that bullet point is just quite short. Yeah.
I think even the way in which the mainstream is talking about this is really it maybe things haven't moved. Well, they've moved forward a lot, but maybe sometimes they haven't. Then of course we've got the stuff that people have gone to live in other parts of the country during lockdown. I've heard this before, and then suddenly we start to shift again towards wanting people to be in the office, and that's an issue. That, and then of course it's all the legal considerations, which during lockdown, things were relaxed, weren't they? In legislation wise, I think that the law was turning a blind eye to a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, nobody had time to even things like health and safety and whether people have got a suitable workplace. It was just a case of just work wherever you can, if you can. And now things are starting to come under different policies and get reviewed and so on. So all of that just has to catch up. I think the laws always last in terms of social change or technological change. The regulation is always somewhere at the back trying to react and catch up. So I'm sure things can be done with existing contracts if the willingness is there.
Yeah, and the organizations are doing this. They're making it very clear to their employees, okay, look, you can work from home and your home is this. It's this address that you've got, probably in the same country as where we are based. However, if you want to go abroad for a month because maybe you have family abroad or you just want to go abroad for a month, then it's got to only be that amount of time, because otherwise after, I don't know if it's 3 or 6 months, we start to get into issues of contracting abroad.
Yeah.
That's interesting that one, it's making employees be more aware of employment law, which is never a bad thing. But also companies are saying, okay, this is the law where we're operating. We want you to be able to do this stuff. Right. We've got to put these parameters in place.
Yeah. And fair enough. The contractors, people may not have looked at their contract of employment for 10 years or something if they've been working in the same place, but it will specify a workplace. It will specify probably a certain number of hours, and it could be that where they work has actually evolved beyond measuring time served and to something more meaningful. But all of these things just need a bit of catch up and renegotiation and sort of updating to the present situation. And I suppose if we're looking at the source of this people management, this is kind of representing probably the most corporate, large employer, maybe the slowest to change, if that's not me projecting too many assumptions onto this source. I don't know.
It's mainstream. Let's just say it's mainstream. At the same time, CIPD is also at the forefront of a lot. So, but I think you're right.
True.
That they're representing the mainstream, and that includes the larger organizations. As someone who makes very clear what this flexibility means is HubSpot, which of course we know that they were already looking at how to be as flexible as possible and how to incorporate their remote people as best as possible way beyond the pandemic. So just going back, they've got 3 modes of operation. You can either be going to the office all the time, you can either be flexible, or you can be completely remote. However, if you are completely remote, you have to be based in a place where they've got a head office.
Hmm.
So for all the things we've been talking about, and I think they've got like 9 or 10 offices anyway. So I think in a way what this has done is has made these, like you're saying, these contracts very explicit, and we're having to be very clear about what this employment relationship means and where the boundaries are.
Yeah, and it's going to take a bit of time to let it all catch up. I mean, and it is good that people are looking at it. To look at the title of the article, is it time to revisit unproductive flexible working arrangements? We can answer that with one word. Well,
Yes.
yes, of course it is. If anything's unproductive,
Yeah.
then see how you can fix it and how that happens and over what time scale and on whose watch and what gets where the movement is expected to come from. That's where the devil of the detail will unfold.
Yeah. And I think that it is a very good opportunity now, especially given this article, and we can use this article to start the conversation, is to really start to think, okay, what are our implicit assumptions about what the new workplace is?
Mm.
Because we haven't, and a lot of people, because of their different experiences during the pandemic, because of how they've experienced changes, because we all know that outside our organization, there've been other changes as well, and different things are now becoming more acceptable in the wider world. But I don't think we've had the time to sit down with employees and say, right, this is how we're seeing what your role is, what we are committing to, what you should be committing to. What about you?
Mm.
And with Richard McKinnon and Pilar, we ran a webinar on this, just on the psychological contract post-pandemic, to really start to tease out what are people expecting. Because in the same way as people might expect to be able to choose, for example, the days in which they come in, they might also be expecting to come into the office and for there to be a buzz and stuff. And then if they come in on a Monday, that's not happening. So I think there's all these kind of, or like we were saying, or maybe someone thinks, well, if I can now work remotely 2 days a week, then I can work from anywhere. Well, maybe
Mm.
not. So I think it's a good time to be looking at this.
Yep, let's calm down and talk about it all now. And maybe it's that a good time of year as well, as we,
Mm.
some people sort of take a bit of a break and a reflection and planning time over the seasonal break.
So some of the things I wanted to share with you and listeners is some of what I've been hearing from either clients I've been working with or my friends, actually, because most of my friends who are not remote friends actually work in very traditional organizations. So one thing is very obvious is that people haven't had time to learn how to work differently. So hopefully we'll start to catch up with that. And also, in some places, there has been no appreciation that remote work can work properly because of the experience in the pandemic. And so there's a lot of assumption that actually there are lots of things you can't do in that space.
Mm.
And so what's happening is that we're still seeing too many meetings. And interesting that this is not a judgment on it. And the use of the office space is being seen as the primary social space, which I suppose it is. I mean, it is easier to socialize when everyone is together in the office. But I don't think that any of the online socializing practices, I think a lot of those have gone completely.
Yes, and it's a shame because not everybody is going to be in the office. Not everybody's going to be in the office at the same time. So there needs to be somebody making sure that doesn't just default that we, when we're not in the office together, we don't interact beyond the work.
Yeah.
There needs to be somebody responsible for that and keeping that culture and those sort of behaviors that we want people to show, and just in terms of how we interact with each other and how we get to know each other and respect each other, those things do have to carry on online as well.
And I was speaking to a friend of mine whose workplace is actually there's a lot of independent they're not contractors, but I think there's a lot of independent working people in there. And I've just realized that the only thing that all those people had in common, because they didn't share tasks, they didn't share clients, they didn't share processes, the only thing that all those people had in common was the physical space they were coming into. And now there's the complete flexibility there. So there's also strange stuff in how their office. They also have individual offices. There's something around how they use them that's also not conducive for people coming in. So very few people are coming in. And so what's happening is that it's that feeling of we're all one thing is completely going away. And they don't have that opportunity. I mean, they've got to work very, very hard to keep that sense of belonging and togetherness, because the work does not bring them together. So again, we're seeing how all these different business models and business setups are having different challenges.
Yeah, there's lots to figure out still. This is not done.
There's also, of course, there's a lot of forcing people into the office when actually people don't understand why. Like someone was telling me, someone who works as admin in their organization, this was happening exactly, that they were like, I don't understand why I need to come in today when all I had is Zoom calls. And also the other thing I'm seeing is that while we want the flexibility, again, we haven't had the time or the willingness to really learn to work differently. So there is still, we're going as we were. It's just that I don't come into the office. So all of these remote work practices, working out loud, all of that is barely happening. And
Yeah.
I think there is the will, and definitely I've seen people in senior positions wanting to change and reassessing the culture in the company, but it just takes so much time and space.
Yeah, it takes a lot of effort and attention, and it takes that across so many different people and levels and teams. And yeah, I think everybody's exhausted after a couple of years, and if they can see that the simplest way out is let's just go back to doing things like we did them before, we knew how that worked, and we all went and stood around the water cooler or whatever in the physical building. It does make sense that people are defaulting to that now that they can, and it's a shame if they miss all the opportunities that remote work could have offered.
Yeah. So in a way, if I flip that, what they've, instead of thinking, what can remote work offer us? Because it kind of, the flexibility box is ticked with that. They're saying, okay, what can the office offer us? So a friend of mine, for example, now his team come into the office on the same days and they have breakfast together, which they didn't before. So they're thinking, right, when we are together, what can we do that we're really going to enjoy? So I think it's quite nice that the office space, which actually, when you think about it, is a big investment from organizations, and a big emotional investment as well, because that space needs to be kept nice and tidy and vibrant. So now employees are actually not taking that for granted. So that's
nice. And I like the breakfast idea. It's a kind of, how can we reward people for getting up early and putting on grown-up clothes and coming into this space, and we can do something social and nice and intentional.
And new conversations, of course, have emerged, like not just the office, but what else do we offer our people? Why are people here? How can we retain them? Lots of conversations around mental health as well have emerged.
Good, yeah.
What's my value? What is our place in the world, in the organization? So I think what's been quite nice, and of course we've got, and also, do we need to reassess other ways of working, for example, with a 4-day week? But all these conversations are emerging. So that's quite, that's good.
Yes, and it's good that we're, I don't know if anyone would say we're post-COVID yet, but if we've reached a point we can have these conversations now instead of just panicking and reacting and sort of putting solutions in place without thinking them through, then that's a good thing.
Yeah. And then finally, I think that what's being interesting as well is how the head of remote positions have emerged. I have always find it funny that distributed companies had a head of remote, but I understand why. But that organizations that are not traditionally that haven't been distributed now have head of remote. The GitLab have a whole thing all around the head of remote, and they have a list of organizations that have picked up those titles, and Deloitte and Unilever were there, which
Yeah, that's impressive. And I think it's going to be a really interesting, just from a sort of HR point of view in the new year, to see how that role gets developed. And it's one of the things that I think it's important if you're looking for a remote role, or a role within an organization that says it's support remote, have they got that position? Have they got someone who's actually really owning that responsibility? And at what level do they sit within the organization? Are they somewhere off in HR with very little power and influence, or are they in the boardroom and actually influencing strategy? So I think it's not everybody's there yet, but it's great to see this role growing and starting to be talked about and looked for.
Yeah, and they've got a whole list of different titles, so it's also going to be interesting to see what they are called. It's a little bit
Yes.
like when employee engagement and stuff was big, and so suddenly you had a head of happiness and head of people growth and head of, I don't know. So
Head of
I had
smiles.
head of smiles. there was a job that came up today on LinkedIn, but I don't know, the link I've got is not taking me there. But only today, as I was sharing this link with you, Maya, I saw in my LinkedIn that the head of remote had come up in. It was also a tech organization, and they actually do stuff for remote companies, and they have been distributed for ages. But again, I thought, that's interesting. That's now being advertised on LinkedIn. So yeah, lots of challenges. Shout out to one of our listeners who shared her interest in this topic. So just before we move on to the other big chunk of this, which is the freelancing, I just wanted, something came through in the Pointer Remote newsletter, which I'm subscribed to, which is the newsletter written by Joe Palmer, who was on the show some time ago. So what she does is, in her company, they help people find remote jobs. So the newsletter comes with lots of remote jobs available, mainly in Australia, if not exclusively. And she said a very interesting fact about the majority of these new job seekers is that they have a job elsewhere. Not surprising, as unemployment is so low, but interesting in the fact that people don't appear to be nervous or apprehensive about moving jobs. So that's again something that we know this happened, and this is something that must be felt in organizations. So just
The great reshuffle continues. And I think it's great because there have been so many layoffs in lots of sectors, especially in tech, that it's not surprising that people are trying to get out in front of that and be proactive and think maybe there's just more acceptability of this churn and the possibilities that opens up for people to go and find what they want before they have to.
and the job market has opened so much more widely. So even looking around, even if you're not quite sure, is also so much easier as well.
Yeah.
So let's. You've been completely immersed. Well, you've always been completely immersed in the not just in the remote world, but also in the world of freelancing. Of course, Maya, now, is the name of the podcast "Future is Freelance" or "The Future is Freelance"?
I'm not sure because it comes up different places, but yeah, I mean, the future is freelance is the manifesto, definitely, because that's what we believe. And I think some places it's listed under the, and sometimes under future. But if you can find those last three words, it's probably us.
This future is freelance. So you've started this show this year, and but you've also started or you've launched a website about remote work in Spain. So where is the freelance world right now? What are some of, I mean, you've got a list here, but where would you start? What is the thing that strikes you most that maybe has changed most this year?
Well, I mean, freelancing is something that's always interested me, but I think one of the most exciting things is the way that the boundaries are blurring more, and we're starting to see a lot more overlap between, it's become more of a spectrum between the people who are employees, maybe in an office somewhere in a fixed location, and freelancers who are working incredibly flexibly. There's all this stuff in the middle now of contractors and retainers and solopreneurs and all this other blended stuff. But it seems to me that a lot of the data is showing, I found this link for it was US independent workers, but there's no reason to think it's any different in the rest of the world, that the number of independent workers is increasing. It's at up 26% over 2021, but they're rolling into that gig workers, contractors, and all sorts of people who might not label themselves as freelancers, but they're definitely not employees.
I was thinking that also freelancers are great for businesses in times of uncertainty because it means you don't have to employ people. So maybe also that is contributing to, okay, well, I'm
I'm
seeing that.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that work still has to be done. I mean,
Yes.
I think even Elon Musk is going to realize that at some point. You can't just fire everybody, especially in tech. It won't just keep working. It will break. And at some point, you need people to come in and fix it and continue to develop it. Now, if organizations are going through challenging times and they want to stay lean and not increase their overheads and liabilities as much, it's obvious that they're going to work with freelancers rather than create new employment contracts. And it's funny because in a lot of businesses, there was lots of work I saw that was interesting and not full time, but people wanted to employ you a year or so ago, especially in tech. They wanted to own you. And I think a lot of those roles are going to open up into more flexible and fractional availability because people are going to realize, well, actually, I don't need to necessarily have a huge salary and liability associated with this role. I can just get it done by a freelancer, even if it's not the person we fired last month from that big freelance role. Those people they might end up working for competitors or even for the same companies, but delivering the same work on different terms. So I hope they negotiate well.
Yeah, and also now that lots of people have experienced remote work over the last years and have seen that actually you can work,
Mm.
that people just don't have to be sitting next to you. I think that again we can expand and look further afield. So whereas we
Yeah.
probably some people might not want to be yeah, we might have an organization which is a hybrid organization, but we might need someone with a very specialized role. And actually, we can't find someone who's willing to come into the office 3 days a week.
Yeah.
But now we know that actually it's okay. We can work with a freelancer who's remote.
Well, if you can work with a remote workforce anyway, I mean, so many organizations went through this transformation and they did it, with a gun to their head when they had to, but they have figured out how to collaborate online. So they can work with colleagues who are distributed. It's actually not that much more of a stretch organizationally and practically to work with freelancers. If your systems are visible and online and digitized, then I think we're going to see much more of a situation of temporary contractors working alongside long-term staff and freelancers who are flexible enough to adapt themselves to something quite corporate for a short period and come together as a team and then move on to the next thing somewhere else.
Do you think then looking at the freelance world, and of course we know some people like to travel, some people don't, etc. But are there now more digital nomad visas, or
Oh,
it seems like there are? I mean, there's lots of places that are saying, "Come here, come
there's
here."
about a new one every month. They're just exploding because countries want to take advantage of this, and I think it's a really exciting. I've been able to talk to lots of people about it on the podcast and tell some amazing stories of people that they're helping to facilitate this. But it's part of this kind of leveling out that if people don't have to live near London or San Francisco or somewhere to work for a big company, then maybe they don't want to live in the suburbs either. Maybe they don't even want to live in the same country. And what it's actually doing for a lot of countries, I don't have the data in front of me, but the Barbados one was one of the first ones. And it's brought huge amounts of revenue to a country which is low in GDP and doesn't have any big employers coming to set up their headquarters there, but it's bringing in people who are going to spend hard currency, and it's working. And it's a chance for countries that are rich in natural beauty and resources to offer that, not just to tourists, but to something more sustainable and longer term. So I think it's an amazing trend. And it's interesting to see also the way that the different countries are approaching it, what they're offering. And some of them they're calling them digital nomad visas, but they're really remote work visas or a path to long-term residency in some cases, which is not always what people want. And there's all sorts of various legal things shaking out. I mean, Spain hasn't even managed to finish the legislation yet. They've been working on it all year, but we still don't actually have it enacted. So that doesn't stop there being a new article every week with somebody speculating on what will probably be in it. But nobody's completely sure yet.
Just going back to the nature of the visas, because you say sometimes they're saying it's a digital nomad, but it's more akin to a remote. So what is a digital nomad visa? Is it just for like 6 months, or what are like some of the conditions?
Yeah, most people would want somewhere that's quite flexible and lets you move on. The ideal digital nomad visa would cover a group of countries and, give people freedom within an area. And I hope that will be the next evolution, because a lot of people don't want to come for 2 years and they don't want to pay for a visa for 2 years when they're probably not going to stay for that time. And they're probably not seeing it as a path to long-term residency, which is obviously maybe what that government is hoping, that people will come and put down roots and bring their professional skills and become a full-time taxpayer, because often these visas give quite generous breaks on taxation, though it varies immensely. We had a really good episode on The Future is Freelance just last week, actually, with John Lee from Work From Anywhere. So he's got the magic formula to figure out where you should live and how you should be employed or contracted with, from if you're the hire is in one place and you're in another place. But it's incredibly complicated. It can be expensive to get it wrong. But also, I think there are legal challenges. I think I'm aware of one in Malta at the moment, because they've offered such a sweet deal to digital nomads that the people already there paying the tax are saying, hang on a minute, why are these newcomers getting such a generous break, whereas those of us who are contributing here long term are actually not? So, and I can see that being an issue in Spain as well, with the high social security costs here. So I think maybe there was a bit of a flurry of legislation around the world, and now people are starting to test it in reality, and we might see some changes. But it's still a movement that's increasing. And provided you have the passport in the first place that lets you travel, because it's still an incredible privilege and incredibly unevenly distributed, this is a movement that we'll see continue to grow, I'm sure.
Yeah, and just listeners, I think I forgot to say we're recording on the 5th of December, 2022. But this year also, Maya, we did comment at least once on articles on these places that you're referring to, where the governments are really trying to attract this new kind of worker. And for the first time, the pushback from the locals for precisely some of the reasons you're saying. So I think that again, that was something unexpected from my point of view.
Yeah, and I can see it even here where I live in Valencia. It's the thing is, it's not digital nomads or remote workers that are to blame. It's the tourism industry really at the heart of it, and the fact that has suffered so much for the last couple of years, and now there's a huge surge in demand. People just want to move around and go, and I think I read somewhere in Valencia that the average return on a 2-bed apartment is something like 30,000 euros a year. Well, that's a pretty nice bit of business, You can well understand that people are going to get a bit greedy if they can make that kind of money. They're not going to put it in long-term renting and actually house a family who could do with living in that apartment. But what people are seeing as the difference is these remote workers, these people turning up with their laptops. So it's easy to blame them. But I think it's improving. In the past, digital nomads were probably more mobile and more likely to just stay for 3 months and not really contribute anything to the local community. Whereas now that demographic is evolving, and digital nomads are more likely to stay for longer. They're more likely to be a bit older, maybe have families, and actually sort of make some meaningful contributions to the societies that they become part of, not permanently, but at least for a little while. They're not all living in isolated co-workings, operating their drop shipping and not really touching the sides of the communities that they visit. They're wanting to experience those communities and live in them. So I hope we'll be able to work out some kind of mutually happy accommodation soon.
Well, it will all take time. As everything.
Yeah.
We're talking about time, and time to understand as well, to really understand what the other people are doing and what is going on. So, well, I'm looking forward to hearing about how all the digital nomad visas and all the remote visas come up in all the different places, because I think it's just really interesting. We had there's also a note from you about the employee layoffs in the tech sector, which of course there were
Mm.
loads a couple of weeks ago, all at the same time. And you're wondering whether they're going to lead to, well, more freelancers and more consulting. What's going to happen with all these people?
Yeah, I'm sure some of them will end up back in traditional firms, but I think there'll be an interesting wave of startups as well. There are so many talented people who are now free to to come and collaborate. I mean, they'll be freelancing for sure because a lot of them have very marketable skills, but there'll be others who are finally free to create that thing that has been at the back of their mind for a while. And it's quite difficult to get development funded unless you come together as some sort of a team. So I think we'll see some quite creative stuff coming out of this in the new year. I think that's the most optimistic take that we can have on all these layoffs anyway.
Yeah, I don't know much about to be honest. I didn't follow the story very carefully, and I'm not really in touch with the sector, but I wonder as well whether that might mean that a lot of people who were staying in some of the big cities because that's where their work was,
Mm.
whether they're going to move. And actually, whether at some point, I don't know, we'll see. Depends how traditional the sector remains. Whether, like, I don't know, Silicon Valley might not be as important as it is now, because actually
Well,
people
I'm
all start to get
sure.
used. Yeah.
Yeah, and because if the Silicon Valley firms are laying people off on their huge salaries, then and they're hiring people from cheaper markets to work remotely, and then the people on the huge salaries are able to take a break and take a reflect. Some of them have got nice packages as well, redundancy of several months, so they might use that time to travel and explore and think about what they want to do and where they want to do it, and decide that they're going to do something completely location independent. It doesn't have to be nomadic. They might want it to be. They might just want to go somewhere different in their own country and put down roots somewhere else. So yeah, more flux, more fluidity. The people who don't like that chaos, I'm sorry, it's not over yet.
No.
But those of us who make a living talking about it and telling stories about it, we can carry on with the ride. It's great.
Yeah, I was listening to an episode of After Hours, where it's the Harvard professor sit down, and I love the show. So people, if you just like to hear people talking, and they really go quite deep, they talk about two things in 40 minutes. After Hours, and they were talking about how these highly skilled tech professionals who traditionally they were all working for tech companies actually can now take those skills to modernize some of the
Mm.
other organizations that really need a remake. I mean, you can see how some of I was looking at a website yesterday of an organization that actually has been providing online services or products for ages. But because they were such an early adopter of long distance stuff, now they're behind. And you could really see how you can really do with people who are really hot on what you can do now, coming into
Mm.
organizations that need all that new, well, that need their digital processes redeveloped. So I thought that was also interesting that maybe
Yeah.
instead of looking for another job in tech, they might look for a job in tech, but in a different industry.
Well, yes, every company is now a tech company because they have to collaborate and communicate online. That's just table stakes to be in any kind of business. You know, maybe you're a corner shop or something in a local village. Maybe you don't have to have an online presence, but you probably still have to take online payments or something. So everyone's a tech company.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. And then, of course, you mentioned you mentioned Twitter, and I don't know. I've had real. I'm still on Twitter, and I wanted to leave because of the way that people were laid off, and I can't do anything about the fact that he said that also Musk said, "Well, no one can work from home anymore,"
Mm.
but the way in which they were laid off. So, but I'm still hanging in there because I am optimistic and think that maybe in 6 months' time the leadership will change. But something that is pertinent to this conversation, I think that Twitter has been a place where a lot of freelancers and entrepreneurs have hung out.
Yeah.
And when being a freelancer now, it doesn't feel as isolating, and you can really find your people online. And Twitter was one of these places. And I just wonder whether if Twitter continues to, I don't know, if people continue leaving it, and if actually it goes down the drain, then where are freelancers going to hang out? And I was wondering whether there's going to be lots more online communities to replace it.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm feeling it will survive. I think it's going to be very chaotic for a while, but I think that eventually he or people closer to the top are going to realize that you can't automate lots of things and you do need people to make it work. Some of the trends have been really weird lately, the things that are at the top of trend lists and things, and you think, I'm sure there used to be human oversight here and there isn't anymore, and slightly odd things happening with numbers of subscribers and things going up and down. But actually pretty much everyone I know is still there.
Is there anything else about freelancing? I mean, I've got something I wanted to come to the AI and writing because it's something you mentioned last time. But before we get into that, anything else, Maya, about freelancing that you wanted to mention?
I suppose the only other thing from my point of view is part of the digital nomad and location independence movement is, and what we were saying, that the regulation and legislation is always the last thing to catch up. So a lot of the work I've been doing this year has been around Estonian e-residency. And I think, I've been writing a lot about freelancers transforming themselves into businesses and businesses of one, still doing what they do and increasing their personal flexibility, but finding more structured ways to deliver it in terms of where your business is located or registered, and limiting your personal liability with a limited company and things like that. So that might be one more trend to just keep an eye on. I hope I'm not overseeing that trend because of the work I've been doing with the podcast, which attracts an awful lot of people in that solopreneur space rather than necessarily kind of very casual freelancers. But I think that might be a trend that we need to keep an eye on and find some data about.
And you've got a blog post around that. So we'll put the link on in the eresident.gov.ee blog.
Lovely Estonians. Hello, lovely Estonians. I know some of you listen to this.
Oh, excellent. Oh, hello. So something with that, picking up from the last What's Going On, we were talking about AI and DALL-E, and I've noticed that on LinkedIn, there's been a couple of people who've posted posts from, so not articles, but in their own personal feeds, from stuff that they had generated with AI. About remote work. And I just thought I'd mention it just because I think in the last episode you said, well, that's what I'm keeping an eye out on. And you know what? So Job van der Voort, who's the CEO at Remote, he posted, why is remote work the future? That's the question to the AI. And you know what? I think the stuff that that AI came up with was pretty good.
Yeah.
Not writing wise as in, whether the prose was good or not, which was okay, but actually some of the stuff that it came up with was like, okay, yeah, this is not it makes sense.
It's not having original ideas, but what it does really well is synthesize an overview, a zeitgeist, when you think that it's eating up all this stuff and then kind of coming out with, what are people thinking? What are the buzz? I mean, maybe we should just, next What's Going On, we just put it all through an AI and say what's people talking about.
I like that as an idea too. Oh, we can do that. We can ask the AI, listeners, send us a question that we can ask the AI. And then we will use it to prompt us for the next one. That's a really good idea. I love that.
Well, you can get good synthesized voices too now, and we might as well just pack it in, actually, Pilar.
Oh yeah, actually, well, yeah, I know. Never mind. Right, before we move on to community, talking of listeners and contributing to the show, Maya, let's do one prediction each about either. Well, you've already done some for the freelance world, but you can either reiterate that or a new one. Just one, either about the freelance or working organizations. Do you want to start or shall I start?
You go first.
Then you can think about it because throw this one on you. I think what we're going to see a lot of, and this breaks my heart in a way, is the whole metaverse in organizations. And we are going to see that instead of trying to reduce online meetings, because they are on the whole, especially when they're more uncomfortable than in person, rather than ensure that we reduce those and adopt more asynchronous practices, we're going to get really excited about the fact that they can feel like we're together, and we're going to see a lot more of that. So I think that around this time next year, maybe it'll be a little bit more normal for some of the larger corporations. That's my prediction.
Interesting. Well, if we're looking a whole year, let's
Yes.
and it's fun to get the crystal ball out, and we've really got no
Yes.
idea. But having talked about metaverses, talked about AI and things, I wonder whether we're going to get some kind of analog backlash where it's going to
Yes.
become really kind of kudos to go and meet people in person, go on a retreat in person, write something without any apps or bots to help you. Maybe you do it on a typewriter
Yes.
or in a notebook or something. Whether we'll get some kind of really purist revolution, not in a Luddite way, but in a differentiating way, that I think there's going to be people who feel threatened about their roles or their boundaries or their professional skills by all this automation. And there might be some pushback against that, which could be quite interesting to see unfold. And I've got absolutely no data or evidence for any of this. And I hope it's not all just coming out of my paranoid brain. And I'm not a Luddite. I'm normally quite a tech evangelist, but I can see people just getting a bit overwhelmed by the speed of change and the way that automation and AI is creeping into everything we do, everything we use, and starting to realize that and to push back and go, hey, hang on a minute, slow down. Let's meet up in person. Let's go and hold hands in a forest or something.
Well, I think your prediction's better than mine. I've already cut down my computer time a lot the last 6 months, and I think your prediction. I want to take your prediction, make it mine because it's better.
We'll share it. We'll start the movement. We started it today.
So just to start wrapping up, I just wanted to thank a few. We've got 3 listeners I just wanted to say hello to. Thanks to Richard Rosenau, because he mentioned as part of a post on podcasts how much he gets from them. Scarlett Ray McCann for all the insights that she has sent in a couple of emails with me, and also to tell us that she's incorporated the show into her commute, into her walking commute.
Okay.
And then Marian Strievsky, she had a comment on the manager mindset in global virtual teams. She shared this on LinkedIn. She said, I particularly and fundamentally, let me just go back for anyone who hasn't been listening regularly. This was episode 315, I think, with Teresa Sigilito-Holema on the manager mindset in global virtual teams. She says, I particularly and fundamentally like this sentence. When working in a global team, due to the different contexts and cultures, we bring different assumptions with us. Because as trivial as it can sound, it is the basic premise of being able to collaborate well in a global virtual team. Understand where your team members are coming from, what the culture is, and what that might mean. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much. We love it when we love it when you get in touch. We love it when you send us your suggestions for future episodes. If you can also send us suggestions of what to put in the AI for future episodes. So I'm going to be wrapping up. I don't have the list in front of me, but maybe I can remember it. First, thank you very, 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 very much to Ross Winter for polishing our episodes throughout the year. And if you want to subscribe to our show, make sure you're subscribed on whatever podcast app you're listening to. If you're listening to us on the website because you've come across it like that, then grab it, put it on your podcast app so you don't miss a show. virtualnotdistant.com is where you can grab the show notes, where you can subscribe to the monthly newsletter of recommended reading and listening. On LinkedIn, you can find us there. I'm not going to say the Twitter handle just in case. I don't want to date the episode too much. But listeners, thank you very, very much for the whole year. We're still here. Maya, any final thoughts before we sign off the last episode of 2022?
Whoa. Well, just to reiterate what you just said, thanks for sticking with us through a turbulent and fascinating year, and just want to wish everybody all the very best, however, whatever, and wherever you're celebrating. And we're looking forward to doing more of this in 2023, so stick around.
Yes, see you next year, everyone. A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.